Hello and welcome to JC Whitney's On the Road. I am your host, Angel Sala Belen, and today we are welcomed and joined by Darryl Holter. How are you, sir?
I'm great, thanks.
You are the author of Driving Force, and you are the founder of 213 Music. You have 5 albums, your most recent album being Roots and Branches.
Yes.
And you own a small bookstore?
Yes, the oldest bookstore, independent bookstore in LA, Chevalier's on Larchmont Boulevard. I'm a co-owner.
How did you get into music, and where and when was the transition from music to automotive?
Well, let's see. I got into music because my father had learned how to play the guitar himself when he was in World War II in the Pacific. And when I was a little kid, he started to show me how to play guitar chords, very simple ones, like a C and a G and an F with one finger. And I started to do that probably when I was about 4 years old. And I learned how to play the guitar around 5. I started to play in some local shows and talent shows, and I started to play on kids' television shows on Saturday mornings on KSTP and WCCO television.
Super cool.
And with that, I started to get to play sometimes at the Westerners, which was a Saturday night show for adults. I would be the little kid playing with a guitar as big as me. So I got into playing that, and then I started to listen to rock and roll, which was relatively new on the radio. And there was one radio station that did rock and roll in Minneapolis, and there was a country station. I did that music, and as I got older, then I heard the Bob Dylan music, and Bob Zimmerman was his real name. We knew him because he was from Minnesota. And I started to do like folk music, and I started to do a lot of that. And as I got involved in the anti-war movement and then in the labor movement, I started to do music that had to do with the war and had to do with labor organizing and things like that. So I moved into that. And then when I moved to LA, I shifted over and kind of just got away from the political stuff and started to write a lot of other songs. And at a certain point, I had about 40 songs I had written, and I met with a really cool guy, Ben Wendell, who's a world-class saxophonist, and he produced my albums. And I started to do albums. My first album, which is self-entitled, then I did an album called West Bank Gone. It was about the West Bank of the Mississippi, which is where the music scene started, that Bob Dylan came out of, and all the music. And then I did a Woody Guthrie album. I did a book on Woody Guthrie in LA. I did an album of his radio songs called Radio Songs. And then I did a couple of more. And Roots and Branches was 2 parts. The first part was Roots. It was based on early types of music. And I had older musicians playing with me. And then Branches was the newer stuff with younger musicians, including my daughter, Julia Holter, and other people. And we did branches that came out of this. So that was Roots and Branches. So that's the last album I did. My daughter's a professional musician. I'm an amateur. My daughter, Julia Holter, is just finishing her last on her U.S. tour. Her last one is tonight. She's done 15 of them in LA, in the U.S. And she's coming home tomorrow.
What kind of music does she play?
It's kind of called new music. She's classically trained, and it's you might hear on KCRW in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of sophisticated.
I'd love to hear it.
It's beautiful. It's very hard to pigeonhole. Julia Holter, she's incredible.
So that transition from doing music to actually being a historian for the automotive scene, helping launch multiple car dealerships in the Los Angeles area. How did that transition?
Well, what happened was that I was teaching at UCLA, and I was doing research on the labor movement and industrial relations. And this was after the Rodney King riots, and if you were here, you saw there was a great deal of downtown was really in bad shape, and most of Figueroa, which is the historic auto row of LA, most of Figueroa was boarded up. My father-in-law, Nick Shamus, was a dealer. He had Felix Chevrolet, which is the oldest dealership in LA, and he started at Studio City up here, used car, but then he built up a group of auto dealerships on Figueroa. But at this period of time when it was very, very difficult to keep the businesses going, he found out he was terminally ill with cancer. And he asked me to come downtown and leave UCLA or take leave and help him. So I came down and I tried to do it for the family, and I started to reorganize his businesses. And I did that. I also had a call from Steve Sample, the president of USC, and he asked me to come and meet with him for lunch, and he told me that people were freaked out by the neighborhood and they were afraid to send their kids to the university.
Okay.
they were thinking about moving like Pepperdine did up to Malibu. Pepperdine used to be in South LA.
Oh, was it downtown or
Further south?
Further south, okay.
And so I got a letter from General Motors that said that maybe you should move Felix Chevrolet to the suburbs. I said, we're in the same situation. He said, what can we do? I said, let me think about it. I came back with a plan in 2 weeks to organize the property owners into a business improvement district, which we did. And we organized 105 property owners. We taxed ourselves money, $500,000. We used that property tax to hire our own people to keep it clean and safe, so we didn't have to depend on the city. And that made the difference for the Figueroa Corridor. It ended up bringing in the Galen Center, University Gateway, which we built across from Felix, and eventually the Staples Center, LA Live. All of that new investment on Figueroa came about because of the improvement district.
Were there any huge implications felt across the market or in the area that originated from what you had done?
I mean, you know, I led the Figueroa Corridor. I organized it, and I led it for 14 years. And it still exists today. I just had a meeting yesterday to discuss, we have a safety and security coalition to discuss all the problems we have with homeless encampments, the vandalism and vagrancy and fires, arson and all these problems. And I still, because I organized them so many years ago, they still look to me, so I'm still involved in some of these things. So we're dealing with these problems even today.
Did you find anything in your fact finding or in your, writing of this book that maybe curated or changed the timeline or the trajectory for automobiles in America?
Well, here's the thing about it. This book is an attempt to answer a couple big questions. And one of them is, why did LA become a city of cars? It didn't have to. And how did that happen? So let's take the first question. Why did it happen? There were a number of things that separated LA from the rest of the country. One is that the city of LA was a little town and only became a city really in the 1880s, 1890s, and around the turn of the century it became bigger. And the automobile started at the same time. The automobile in the city of LA, unlike other cities, developed at the same time. They were babies together, the city and the automobile. They were teenagers. They were young adults together. They developed together, and their relationship is intertwined. So that's part of it. LA had a lot of other things. It had this incredible weather. You could drive your car year-round in LA. You couldn't do that in Chicago. You couldn't do that in most of the United States. So that was good. You also had this incredible geography. You had oceans, you had rivers, you had mountains, you had all this wonderful stuff, deserts. And so that was interesting. You also had a relatively young and affluent population who were very interested in cars. And you also had Hollywood, which was important for cars too. So those were elements about why it became kind of a car city. But what I found in my research was how this was done. And what I mean by that is that how could automobile manufacturers make a connection between automobile buyers at a time when no one believed that automobiles were ever going to work? I mean, everyone supported horses and didn't think that you would ever take the horseless away from the horseless carriage. And so what I found in my research was that we think about automobile manufacturers as being like the big three, but in 1900, there were probably 400, 500, 600 little companies in garages in the Midwest and the East Coast trying to make a car without knowing how to do it. And they had no money. Banks wouldn't give them any money. Why would we give money to such a crazy idea as this? And so they didn't have any. And what happened, what I found in my research, which I didn't know until I did the research, was that the manufacturers had a lot of serious problems that they couldn't overcome. They had no money. They had no money to make cars. They had no money to lend anybody to buy cars unless they were already rich. They had no idea how to fix cars. They didn't even make cars. They really assembled cars. They took parts that other people made and put them together. So how did they do this? They did this by relying on local people in Los Angeles who decided, I'm going to be a car dealer. I'm going to do this. Who were these people? Mostly bike guys that had bike shops on Main Street in downtown LA. They had bike shops. They knew about things that were mechanical. They were into bikes. They got into cars. And what they would do was that if you wanted to buy a car, you would say, yeah, this is what I want to buy. I would say, okay, I need you to give me a deposit. You give me a deposit for that. I'll add to that deposit. We'll send it to the manufacturer. They will use that money to go buy parts and buy someone to put it together and send it back to me in 2 months, and I'll give it to you. That's how it was done. Their working capital came from dealer deposits. The dealers provided the money for the manufacturers to make the cars.
So
Nobody
different.
knew this.
Yeah.
I didn't know it. Okay, so they did that.
Okay.
They also had no place to put these. They had no money to buy a place to sell the car. They didn't do that. Who did that? The dealers. The dealers would rent a space on Main Street downtown.
Yeah.
They would rent a storefront and they would put one car in there. That car was called a demonstrator. You could drive it around the block, and if you want to order it, give me a deposit and we'll send it to the manufacturer. They'll build it and send it back. So they had that. Same thing with, let's say that you don't have a lot of money, but you want to buy a car. You want to buy it on credit. They don't have any credit. But who does? I do. I know you. Okay, I know you, Angel. You want to buy a car? I know who you are. I'll give you a deal. You give me $400, I'll give you a promissory note for 2 more payments and then you'll pay it off. I start to get into selling cars on credit. The dealers are doing this. They're figuring it out. The same thing with fixing. How do you fix a car? We don't know. We just sell them. No, that doesn't work. There are no warranties. What's a warranty? There's no manuals. How do you fix a car? We don't know.
There's so
This
many,
all had to be done. And people had to figure it out because no one knew how to do it. I never knew this. I was a dealer for 19 years with 8 stores. I had 1,100 people working for me. I had 50 managers.
Yeah.
But I didn't know about this story until I discovered it myself in the documents that I found. As I mentioned to you, I discovered these documents.
Yeah. So this sort of kind of gives more of a aha to why things are the way they are today.
Exactly.
So like when you're looking at the dealership, why did this dealership put an exorbitant dealership fee on this thing? Oh, well, because the dealership is fronting a ton of this operation.
That's right. I mean, all kinds of questions you might have about today you can answer by looking at the historical. And that's, you know what? That's the importance of, what's the most important thing I tell people about history? History. History allows us to understand the sources and the origins of issues we face today. Where do they come from? Why?
Why? Yeah.
Why do we have homelessness?
Yeah.
Why do we have unemployment? Why do we have war? Why do we have these things? There are reasons. Go back and understand them and we have a better idea about how to go in the future.
Right. Indicators, for sure. With this story right here, has it created any other leads for you and maybe a possible new book?
This is funny because people ask me, they say, you take this book up to 1930. Now, are you going to write a book from 1930 to 1950? And you know what I say? I say no.
Why?
Because it gets really complicated.
Why?
It's a whole new thing. And I've done this. This is the very beginning of it.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to do.
Yeah.
This is the first book on how cars were merchandised in America, in any city. I thought there would be other books and I didn't find any. So now people can look at this and they can say, okay, that's how it was done in LA. How was it done in New York? How was it done in Chicago? Let them go out and do all that work. And then let them say, what happened after 1930?
Yeah, right.
Other people can do it.
Yeah, so was there a point in so what happened in 1930?
Well, 1930 is a very important point because of the Depression.
The Depression, that's right.
The end of the 20s, at the beginning of the Depression. The number of automobile the automobile manufacturers drops. This is really when you have the big 3.
Yeah.
The big 3 comes out of this because they're the only ones that are
can
standing.
survive.
They're only Well, there's a little bit more than that, but there's not many. A
Yeah.
lot of dealers, a lot of manufacturers go out of business in the
that
Depression.
period. So do you have a defining moment in a car that shaped you in an inspiring way?
Well, let me tell you a story about the first car I ever bought.
Yeah.
I'm in Minneapolis, and my father used to always. My father was in the printing industry, but he knew cars like the back. He bought his first car when he was 15 years old, and it was a Model T, and he worked on it. He knew how to work on cars, and he even actually made race cars and race cars until my mom made him quit. I got a photo of me in his race car when I was 2 years old, sitting on his lap. And anyway, my father would always take me with him to look for cars because I could look at the front of the cars and I could always tell what what brand and what year it was. If it was anything from the end of the war, because they didn't start making cars until 46, 47. But I could look at the cars and tell them what they were. In those days, used car lots didn't put the years of the makes of the cars on them. They maybe just put the prices. So we would go out at night when there weren't any salesmen around, and we would look at the cars on the lots. We were in Minneapolis, and we went down, we found a lot on East Lake Street near the Mississippi River, and there was a small used car lot, and they would put the older ones in the back. So my dad was looking, and I was looking. I went into the back, and I found a 1949 Mercury.
Okay.
And I looked at this Mercury, and it was in the back, and this is 1962 that we were looking. And I said, hey, Dad, come on and look at this 49 Merc. So he looked at it, and he said, geez, it's pretty nice. I said, it's clean. He said, yeah, he said, but it's pretty old, Darryl. I don't know, you know. I said, yeah, but it's really clean, and it looks like it doesn't have many miles on it. He said, yeah, it looks good. I don't know, but it looks kind of old. We went home. Next day I went to class. I was on the hockey team, so I went to hockey practice. And after that, I went over to my girlfriend's, Jane Peck's house, and I was at Jane's, and I called my mom to pick me up in the 58 Chevy. And so I was talking with Jane out in front about this car. I was talking about this 49 Mercury I saw the night before, going on. And I said, and you know what, Jane? See that car driving down the street? It looks like that car. And I look at it, and it comes closer. I look at it, and guess what? My dad's driving it. My dad went down and bought the car. I paid him $299. He paid $100 on it, and then I was only 14. So he drove it for a year until I got my license, and then I had my first car, a 49 Mercury. And I said to my dad, I said, Dad, this is a car like James Dean had in Rebel Without a Cause. He didn't even know who James Dean was. He was busy working all the time. They're going to movies. But
Perfect.
That was my first car.
Perfect. That's amazing. Gotta love Dad for that.
Well, he was great. We were really close, my dad and I.
Yeah. And he pulled up to the girlfriend's house.
That was cool.
That's so cool, dude. Well, Darryl, where can people buy your book?
I encourage people in LA to buy it at Chevalier's Books, which is my bookstore.
Right. That's right.
Also, I could say that it's an expensive book in a sense because it has this beautiful cover.
Yeah.
It has 160 incredible photos,
Oh, yeah.
most of which no one has ever seen. This is a book that doesn't sit on your shelf at the end, but it sits on a table so everyone can see it.
Yeah.
That's the way I've designed it. You can buy it at Chevalier's Books on Larchmont Boulevard in LA, but also you can go on Amazon and you can buy it for the cheapest price because, as you know, the strategy of Amazon is to sell everything more cheaply than everybody else to gain market share and put everybody else out of business.
Yep.
So you can buy it, the cheapest price you'll find will be Amazon.
Okay. All right. Is there a website other than Amazon?
There's a Darryl Holter, there's a Driving Force website that is kind of connected to my music website.
Okay. So they can either come to your bookstore in Larchmont Village or they can go
You can go online, or you can go to Darryl Holter, you can find it.
All right, Darryl. Well, look, man, I really do appreciate you coming in today. It was a pleasure meeting
Are
you.
you going to hear my guitar?
There's a guitar? Please.
Okay, I'm down at Felix Chevrolet. I'm in the service department. And I keep seeing in the back of the service department, there's a car with a cover on top of it. You know, I say to one of the parts managers who's been there for about 40 years or something, I say, hey, what is that back there with that covered up in there? Oh, Mr. Holter, you want to know about? Yeah, well, what is that? Oh, well, that's a car that someone brought in here for us to fix, and then they left it and never came and picked it up. I said, well, what is it? Well, it's an old Chevy. I said, well, how old is it? Oh, I think it's a 1950. He said, well, when was it left here? Oh, I think it was left here like in 1959. So I said, well, I want to look at that Chevy. So I took a look at it, and there it was. So we fixed it up, and I wrote a song called Don't Touch My Chevy. Well, you can borrow $10 now and then. I hope I get it back. You can take my fancy cowboy boots and my Stetson hat. Yeah, but there's one place where I draw the line and I never give an inch. And if you don't want the scene to get heavy, don't touch my Chevy. Don't touch my Chevy. Don't touch my Chevy. Well, you can take my Martin D18, probably get away. You can drink my Johnny Johnny Walker Blue and live for another day. Yeah, but when it comes to my vehicle, keep your hands to yourself. You don't want the scene to get heavy. Don't touch my Chevy. Don't touch my Chevy. Don't touch my Chevy. Well, it's a vintage 50 Chevrolet. We painted it jet black. It's got 3-speed on the column shift, straight pots in the back, and it's traveled every street and road, freeways in LA for half a century. Bought from Felix Chevrolet. Well, you can grab my graphite fishing rod and my world-class reel as well. You can kiss my fine wife on the cheek and probably live to tell. Yeah, but when you're standing by my car, you're skating on thin ice. You don't want the scene to get heavy. Don't touch my Chevy. Don't touch my Chevy. Don't touch my Chevy.
Yeah.
There you go. Don't touch my Chevy.
That's right, guys. So if you see Darryl out there, he's driving his Chevy, please don't touch it. But thank you for coming out today, Darryl, man. That was amazing.
It was fun.
Darryl,
Thanks a lot.
thank you, sir.